All right, everybody. This is the Uzu channel, or I say Uzo. What the heck? I can't even pronounce the name of the channel. Okay. Anyway, so yesterday I kind of set some people off, and if this was on my YouTube channel before it got literally false copyright struck, I'm sure that would have reached about 150 to 200,000 people, assuming I never grew a single extra subscriber since 2020, February 2020, and that seems unlikely. So if we just had the same about 10,000, 11,000 subscribers to that YouTube channel, that's how much reach that would have been. I knew what type of topic that was once it started to get people. And so that inspires me today. And as I was changing direction in general with all of the groups, we can't just remain the same. And if anybody wants to speak, you always request to speak, of course. But for now, the first 5 to 15 minutes, I'm going to do a monologue and talk about these things. But yeah, so we can't move forward without addressing the problems, because that's the issue that we have now. If we don't talk about what has happened before, what we're going to do is we're going to be doomed to repeat those problems. So one of the things that we had here, I'll read what I put, because I didn't put it in this group. I think I could have copied and pasted it, but hey, where it's at is where it's at. So one of the things that I said is that because if I use black, that doesn't get through to people because they don't associate themselves with black. When you see everybody that looks like you, there's absolutely no reason. I understand. There's absolutely no reason for you to say, hey, I'm this and somebody's that, because basically everybody looks the same. That's why there are slightly different issues. Now, the world is still going to look at you the same, but I understand why some people would not associate with it, even if so. So I use the term African. Those are interchangeable at this point, the way I'm using it. That caught people's attention because when I use African versus black and said the same thing before, it did not set off some people. So when I said that Africans whine and complain, and then when someone says, here, you can have it back, and that's very rare, but it happens. And then I said, then guess what? It goes back to where it was, not much. Now, we got a case of Zimbabwe. Yes, we're going to go there today. I'm not going to bring up the figures here. Everybody can look at this. The history is there. It's set. Now, Zimbabwe said, hey, we got colonized. We still have these people here. If you're truly Zimbabweans, you're going to contribute to the community. Indians, British, and other Europeans. If you are really Zimbabweans, as you claim, then you're going to contribute. I don't see any of you marrying the people here. I don't see any of you buying any of the things here. If you can help it, you're just like, look, we're going to control the food. So therefore, we don't need anything from you guys because we don't really have to buy anything from you. So they sent their money back to Britain, back to India, and they said, OK, we're going to have you all leave. And if you don't want to leave by choice, we're going to force you out. And that's what happened. Now, what happened after that, of course, UK, Australia, and so on and so forth. That's why I say white supremacy is a system. They work in lockstep. They tell you can't work together. They do the divide and conquer. But even if they fight amongst each other, because I mean, those nations were not always friendly to each other. They're going to say, hey, we're all going to just still go along with these sanctions. That's the thing. So if I'm having an argument, and this is what I see, to get slightly on a tangent here, if I'm having an argument against another person that looks like me, that is basically essentially my cousin, that's fine that we are arguing. As soon as a non-African, non-black person comes in and they say the exact same problem, I'm just going to start calling them out and say, yeah, what? Excuse me? You don't have the right to talk about these issues. You don't hear me talking about white people's issues. We talk about the things they've done and atrocities that they've done. I don't care about your issue. So if you come over here and say, well, yeah, you see them people over there in Kenya, they're over there suffering, aren't they? Uh-huh. So why don't you go back to the slums of Ireland where you came from and go fix the country there? Because I notice you're not there. That's the energy that you need to keep. If somebody starts that's outside of like if you got a family feud and you're arguing with your family, do you let a stranger come in and do that? It's like, okay, it'll be different if it's your girlfriend or boyfriend or something like that, because then you would think, to have them as your family, because they're not officially your family until they're married. But you would essentially have them as your family, so that might be something. But you're not going to have maybe even a friend, unless they're just like close like that, like family, or some kind of associate or a stranger come in and then complain. They talk about your mother. You're complaining about your mother. Oh, she's fat, she's lazy, or she's always getting on my nerves. And then that person comes and said, yeah, your mom is real fat. You just look at them like they crazy. Like, no, no, no. I can say that, but you can't. So that's the energy we need to keep. So in this case, that's where this is coming from. So Zimbabwe, after kicking out all the people that owned it, the land is now back to the native population. What did they do? Well, I'll tell you. History is already my confirmation here. They didn't do much with the land. So the original people there that were already farming there apparently forgot how to farm. Maybe because it was long enough, colonized long enough, you didn't learn or whatever. And people didn't put in the work, because it requires work. If you don't know, it's trial and error. So you didn't put in the work to learn. You just said this should come easy. Other people blew the money instead of putting the money that they got, because they got money that was left there because they drove them out. Hey, look, this money is ours. The money that we tried to give you, you didn't want to leave by choice, so we're going to force you out. It's going to be a little bit rough for some of y'all. And so there was money. And some of the people, instead of putting it in a business, they just kind of blew it. They bought what they could buy. Maybe it was a car or something like that. All of this is evidence. You can look at what happened. And then we got Zimbabwe today, which is still under heavy sanctions. It's not right, but they're still under heavy sanctions. And we can say, hey, that caused a lot of the issues, but let's point out the ones that we could control. The ones that the people could control was them having sovereignty over the food that they grow. So instead of using your brain power to grow the food, you said, let's live it up for the short time that you could, because it was very short lived. See, that's when I said the person was looking out for self. That's what I mean, because there were several things. I even dreamed about it. And so a lot of that conversation going through yesterday, I was like, man, you can hear the person. If you listen to that recording again, you can hear when somebody's speaking from self. Now, you could say, hey, that's the environment they grew up in. Yeah, that doesn't mean anything, because the person's mindset goes wherever their environment is. So if you come from an environment of thieves, for example, well, no matter where you go, you see certain people. Remember, they sent their thieves to colonize other areas, Australia, USA, those things. What do you get from those? You got the same thieves. It didn't matter where the people were. They still killing and destroying. No matter where they went, they still killed and destroyed. So when somebody say, well, it's the environment that causes me to do that. Yeah, kind of. But then if you're used to the environment and you don't make that choice to change, because you can be in literal prison and you can participate in some of the weird stuff that they do, or you can say, yeah, all this stuff is going on around me, but my mental state, I'm keeping myself as it is. I'll change a tiny bit to defend myself, but otherwise I am still the same person. I'm going to get more enlightened. See, that's when you go into environment after environment and you'll adjust a little bit some of your actions, but your mindset stays the same. That's what these people were doing. So when somebody say, oh, if I'm just out of Nigeria, if I'm only out of Congo, I'm only out of here and out of there, I'll do better. Nah, we don't see that. The evidence is really just not there. Because unless your mindset changes, you are going to produce the same thing no matter what. So the Zimbabweans that were there, they didn't do much with the land. And so therefore, it made them even weaker. See, that's the thing. If you don't got control of your food, if you can't grow your own food, what the heck you going to do? You have to literally beg other people for food. And that's the basics of everything. Even if you don't got a place to stay, you got food. You can make makeshifts houses, you can do stuff. People could go in caves, people could dig something underground, whatever it is. But you don't got food, what can you actually do? Because we all got to eat, we got to drink water. It's inevitable. Everything else you could say is optional. Even with the shelter, It'll be better if you're living inside and it'll be more conducive. But for real, those can be made. But food, yeah, no. So let's move on. Here's some things that I wanted to point out that we're looking at now. So now that I pointed out the problem, and that's not just Zimbabwe. I use Zimbabwe, well, they're heavily sanctioned and they got a lot of issues that come from the West, come from the Europeans, come from other people sanctioning them. Yeah, they got those, but we're going to point out the things that could be controlled. And if you ain't even going to be concentrated enough to control your food, I don't know what else. Because Cuba, while they are under heavy sanctions too, and I mean heavy sanctions too. I want to say Zimbabwe was worse, but Cuba, and being right next to the United States, they kind of turned around and did something different. Now, the people are still struggling a little bit, but they work with what they got. See, that's the thing. They work with what they got. They don't have somebody close to them being able to help them out. So we got to look at the different environments and see the different outcomes. That's what I meant by yesterday. And that's what I'm going to mean going forward. Here's something I want to point out. If I can get this thing full screen on my screen. Here we go. And now, share screen. Here we are. Where is it? Boom. Okay, so we got the world population here. Now, some people say population is going to bring change. Yeah, but China barely had any population. That thing was skyrocketing. You got 1.4 billion people. And Nigeria, doubled the population within the last decade or so? And that population skyrocketed, and you don't see a similar growth at all. Indonesia, on the other hand, population went down. Was it 20% or something like that? And yet, it was either Indonesia or... yeah, I think it was Indonesia. Their population went down by 20%, and yet their economy is growing. So population size don't mean nothing. The U.S. population is only going up. This was 330 last year. So that means they imported probably about 5 million immigrants. Most of them illegal, many from China. They don't talk about that one. They don't show that. So a lot of Chinese illegals in the U.S. and all these other countries coming in. Population going up, U.S. is struggling. So population size and growth doesn't mean the economy is going to go there. What makes the economy? Your production. Your production. That's what makes the economy. And if people aren't willing to put in the hard work to produce, they're not going to go. So let's go over so I can show something really quick. Okay, I'm already on population. All-time total. No. Where is that at? Dang, I just went for a blank. Okay, so we all know that I was going to put up Africa compared to the other ones. I forget how to get there. I'm trying to go by continent, but it's going by country. So maybe if I go by country, it does by continent. But in any case, nope, it's not doing it. Oh, well, we all know that Africa is basically about the same size as India and China, a little bit less population size. So we got about 1.3, 1.2 trillion. And basically, it's like every person has, if you spread out equally, basically every person got like $1.50 per person. That's just how much little money is there. It's like $1 per person. Here's the thing I'm about to show you guys that comes with this solution. Now, for a second, let me do this real quick. I'm going to stop sharing the screen because on Telegram, it's a little bit different. I can't just freely go through tab and tab and tab. So let me do this real quick. I want you guys to see this. I want you guys to see this number right here. Now that I got this up like this, I can now leave it alone. Yeah, and this new computer I got a very loud mouse and a keyboard. I'm like, what the heck? Paid all that money, but it's more noisy. So anyway, so Did you see this? Chinese savers stashed away 2.6 trillion US dollars last year. Okay, now they're trying to say this other thing. Every one of these Western media, aka white run media companies, they're gonna say, oh, there's this revenge buying. They're gonna spend, they're gonna spend, they're gonna spend. I'm gonna just let you know, this is in 1 year. This is not multiple years. This is 1 year. Now, compare this to the United States, which has 700 billion US dollars stashed away and is shrinking. Okay, they saved 2.6 in 2022, and the US has 700 billion US dollars in savings and shrinking. Now you could say, oh, they got a larger population size. Here's something that's about to, there we go. Here's something that's about to, okay. Here's something that I want to show you. In that same amount, the GDP of the United Kingdom, so if you looked at just Britain, but United Kingdom, that's easier, was, as I zoom in on this, so I can show you guys, 2.27 trillion British pounds, which is about 3 billion US dollars at that time. And this was in 2022. If you looked at just Great Britain in general, the Chinese saved the same amount of Britain just by itself, not including Ireland and all the other stuff. So you're looking at the Chinese saved the entire economy of the United Kingdom almost, and they're like the 4th largest economy on the planet. It gets worse. China was poorer than many African nations. Now, I was going to put this in the chat yesterday. I decided not to at the time. I put it on my WhatsApp, but I did. China, $89 per person. Now, they stopped at 2017. Obviously, they're trying to do something here. But let's compare this to Kenya, which is slightly ahead. You could basically say they're about the same, but slightly ahead at $97. Look at Democratic Republic of Congo, 220. The Ivory Coast, 153, Ghana, 183, Nigeria, $93, so on and so forth. South Africa. So South Africa kind of grew similar if you really look at it like this, but I wonder if that's just in the hands of the Boers. I just wonder if it's at the hands of the Boers. So this stopped at 2017, which means this really got bad because China got a lot more of their money starting in about 2019 and 2022, as far as what they saved. Okay. So these numbers are even worse today. And obviously, you know, the inflation and all of that. But this is just a comparison right now. Hopefully you guys are following. Now, not only this, one last thing to point out. All right. Let's look at this. Now, this is how much money the Chinese have saved up. 132.2 trillion yuan, which is 18.41 trillion US dollars. Now, when I tell people, hey, you know what, you want to try to, sell to China and all of those things instead of the US, this is how much money they got saved. Now, they have a savings rate of about 44%, and at the lowest, they basically save 30. So they save between 30 and 50% of their money, because that's the average, I think, was 44%. So they save between 30 and 50% of their money. This includes back in that time in the 1960s when they barely had any money to their name. Now, here's the caveat. One, China was allowed to grow. That's one. White supremacists like Asians, because as I told you yesterday, they said it themselves. Read their own books. Read their books about this when they were being more honest, when they were calling the African kings and everything like that, like, oh, this is a revered individual, your honor, and everything like that, when they used to be talking like that. Now, white supremacists, they used to write about, hey, white supremacy is the fear of genetic annihilation. So you mix a black or African person with them, and what does the baby come out like? Okay, we already know what the answer is. They're not going to come out looking white at all. So you mix an Asian person in them, other than, I guess, Indians, and then you're going to come out with a baby that could look, hey, they could still be white. All right. This is why they kind of like Asians. This is why. They thought they were going to do to China right now what they did to Japan. They're like, hey, we like you up until you start trying to pass us up. Because at the end of the day, you're not really us. So we're going to be at the top. You guys can be number two. That's fine. We'll let you be number two. So when Japan almost passed them up in the 1980s and 90s, there was a whole bunch of anti-Japanese propaganda pushed around, just like they're doing anti-Chinese propaganda at the current moment. So that's the whole thing. It's like, hey, we like you up until the point where you're economically going to pass us. Now, how do we learn from this situation? One, what the Chinese do is they actually tell about their own history, that 100 years of embarrassment. So let me take this off of the screen. So I'm going to come up with solutions here because I don't just point out problems, as I said on their stream at the beginning. The Chinese talked about their 100 years of embarrassment. The Great Embarrassment. You could look that up. You could literally look up 100 years of shame or embarrassment. Either one interchangeable, you'll find it. And you can read about it. Where the Chinese were arrogant enough, they had because they had their religious belief or something like that. There was a storm that happened when one of the kings was pushing through on his ship, and it kind of decimated their ship. So they took it as a sign from the gods. Like, yo, you guys need to stay on your own land. So they decided for the next few hundred years or whatever, their policy is we're not leaving China. We're going to stay within our kingdom. And anybody else, you're kind of lesser than us and all that. You know, there's different types of people that feel that way. Ethiopians feel that way about outsiders too. Like many of them, not all, but many of them are like, hey, you're not even like us. The Jewish people, not Jewish because they're different, but the Jewish people, many of them feel the same way. So this isn't something new. It isn't exclusive to China. So they were like, hey, you guys, you outsiders, cool. And Britain and other European nations did not like the one-sided trade. So they noticed China is taking all the silver, but they're not really selling to the outside. And you notice if Chinese come to Africa, you kind of notice they don't really buy your stuff like that. And they kind of stay to their own, kind of like what the Indians did. And this is the same thing that happens to Black Americans with every other group. They come, mingle in, they don't spend any money. So that's what we're noticing. I'm like, man, every other group is kind of like selfish. Every other group. But they come to other people, and Britain was like, yo, we got to figure out a way where we can make a profit. Because at the end of the day, they're trying to, every people are looking out for themselves. Let's just take any racism aside. They're looking out for themselves. They want to make more money. And they noticed it was extremely lopsided. It wasn't like slightly. It was like, all right, every one silver coin we get, they're getting like 12. And that's an over exaggeration, but you get the point. So essentially, Britain was like, yo, we're going to sell you opioids. They didn't really care that was there. And then that's what happened. Some of the people started getting addicted. And then the Chinese leaders said, hey, could you guys stop it? And they were like, okay, we're going to look into it. But really, it's like what they always say. We're going to look into it. But they weren't really actively trying to stop it. It was one British general, whatever, he was trying to, and then they replaced him. And then after that, it was like, yo, we're going to come into China. We're not going to just come and beat you militarily. We're going to keep going. See, they want to run the yard. They didn't want to win the game. They said, we're going to win the game and we're going to embarrass you. So they came in, and that one general was like, hey, we've done enough. We can stop right now. The Chinese, because they were like, yo, we about to fight y'all. And then they realized how weak their military was. It wasn't even fair, the type of thing that happened. So then Britain came and destroyed them. And then they gave up the white flag. They said, hey, you're coming here to our capital city, because they got two. They got a north one, Nanking, and then they got a south one. And they were at the southern capital. And then they were like, yo, we can stop right here. Nope. What the British did, they replaced the one general that had more sympathy, and then they burned the whole capital down. He was like, yo, this is unnecessary now. And they burned it down. After that, they said, hey, France got up in it. Russia got into it, by the way. They were like, hey, we're the ones that can tell. And then the U.S. noticed it, and they said, hey, look, we gonna do this thing. So we can tell you what We're going to buy before your local farmers, before your local business people are able to take advantage of this business. We are the ones that can invest in the business first. We're the ones that can do the contracts first, and we can determine the interest rates on all of that. That's what the deal was. It's called the right of first refusal. That was the first time it was set up in history, if I'm not mistaken, with the Chinese. That came in, and I think it was the U.S. Some reports say the U.S., some say Britain or France. I don't hear any of them with Russia, but they all had their own versions of it. All of them was carving up China at that time. And then for the next 100 years, the Chinese were just brutalized, as far as not the same way that India or even Africa or anything like that was brutalized. More like, yo, we're going to tell you what to do. We're going to have all these interest rates and everything. So China, unlike what happens in many places in Africa, and this really annoys me, they're not teaching, they're teaching the history. They're telling the people exactly what went down in that 100 years of shame, 100 years of embarrassment. They're telling them. See, they do it at home. They don't have to rely on the school system, but then also the school system backs it up. So this is what we can learn. You are supposed to tell your children the actual history. If you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. That's the whole thing. So if you don't even know how Nigeria, how Uganda, how Tanzania, all of these places got liberated on paper, quote unquote, or what was happening that 200 years, 250 years, that 100 years plus of colonization, and what happened before that, because that's the thing. Chinese people have kept on to their culture. You see, they're still speaking their language. If you don't teach your children that, then how do you expect to break through from all of these problems right now? So that's number one. You start in the household, in the mind. This goes back to what I just said. If your mental ain't together, then anybody can just tell you and feed you any information and you believe them. The Chinese got embarrassed. They got completely decimated. Their capital was razed, aka burned to the ground. That's what that means, razed. And even one of the British generals was like, yeah, we shouldn't do it. And they said, all right, you're not white supremacist enough for us. Take them out, replace them with the other guy that's going to do what we say. Burn it to the ground. We don't need to do it, but we want them to know. They don't just send, when they punish one of us, they make sure they signal boost it on all of their media. And they make sure the punishment doesn't even fit what you just did. See, that's the thing. It's called making an example out of somebody. That's what they did with China. So the Chinese today, they remembered that. Then they also said, hey, we need to copy the West, aka capitalism and all of this other stuff temporarily, because they're moving toward less and less capitalism at some point. And they said, we need to copy what they did because what they have done is working. They're winning. We're losing. If this was a sports game, which is basically a mini version of war, they are beating our asses. So we need to copy them. And they got real quiet and real humble. You don't want to tell people your moves. That's the second one. You don't telegraph everything that you're going to do. They've made their 50, 100 year and 500 year plans, right? And they're moving toward them. The people that made those plans originally are all dead, every single one of them. And yet they're still operating on that plan. So when they talk about, hey, you got to teach yourself and your mind, know your history. And when you know it, you then tell others so that they can tell their children, that then go with that mindset and go out. Because why is it that no matter what country you're in around the world, they all happen to just discriminate against people that are from Africa? As far as you can see, everybody's from Africa, but everybody that you would see that you would say is black. Once you leave Africa, they call you black. So anybody that is associated with that, how come that keeps going on for the last 500 years? That means it's taught at their home. Because if they don't teach it in school directly, because they don't in some places, then they're teaching it at home. So why can't you and I and others like us be bothered to teach ourselves and our children and our cousins and nieces and nephews the same history so that we avoid falling under that rope? But we don't do it. Instead, we argue when somebody points that out. Instead, we just say, hey, I'm just trying to live my life. I'm doing that. Okay, if all you do is get money, then what's going to happen to your children when you have them? And then you pass on the money to them. They're going to see that same person, because that's what I said. It's a culture of trusting other people. That's what number 2 is. If you teach your history, then you know not to trust those people over there. Because if you just go in the past version of you, because your ancestors are you, the past version of you trusted them. You said, hey, these missionaries over here, they're okay. And they came in and destroyed your nations. You trusted them by showboating and say, hey, look at all this gold I got. Because that's what many of the African kings and everything were doing. We're going to show out like what we do with each other. We're trying to impress somebody. So we're going to wear all this gold. We're going to let them know all the money we got. So that's, I don't know what that is about black people worldwide. We got big ass mouths. Here's all the money we have, guys. And they're telling you just part of whatever the truth is. They went to the Europeans, look at all the money we got. We could do this right now. We could just end this right now. What are you doing? You come to our universities in Egypt. You come to our universities in other places. You guys can learn freely. What they do, they came up and said Pythagorean theorem. That came from the black people, but then that gets credited to the Greeks. So, and all of the people right there in that area. Pythagoras and those all that stuff from algebra and all that, they was learning under black people. And if you look into it, their own books, they would tell you who they were mentored by. So, number 3. So number 1, now I'm not even going to review. Number 3, because I got a problem with repeating the things here. Number 3, what you want to do going forward, after you've already established all of your knowledge of self, then you are now teaching that within your home environment and the people around you. See, what's going to happen is when you teach the people, you're going to see all the people that are resistant to learning that. And you basically better, if you can't eliminate them out of your life, maybe it's family member or something, you just eliminate the time you spend with them. Okay. Me, I'm doing this and this will be part of what I'm doing. So I'm going to talk to the people. But in my personal life, somebody like that is like, yo, I just spend 90% less time with them. And I just know, hey, you know, that person right there, they're not to be trusted. I can't deal with them. No. Business wise, maybe. Because if they are good with business, then I'll do business with whoever. But as far as personal or spending my time or saying, hey, I trust them or whatever, no. No. So you eliminate the time you spend with them. That's what you do. You eliminate the time you spend with non-productive people. Number 4, when you've done that, here's how you build up yourself to then get to the state where China is right now. You hold on to that code like your life depends on it. Over here, we say black first. And I've said it to you guys here. Black first means the black people in your area first before anybody else, before your religion, before your ethnicity, before anything else, before your family, really. It's black first. Because that wouldn't need to be said. That's in response to what everybody does to us. They say Indian first. Really, it's Asian first, but Indian first, Chinese first, white first. That's how they do it. They don't have to say that. The fact that we got to say it is even bad enough. That means our code, we're off code so much, we got to say it out loud. But when white supremacy was first establishing itself, it actually did say it out loud. You read their books from the 1500s and 1700s, they were saying white supremacy. We are white supremacists. This is what this is. So when they spread it to everyone, they had to tell everyone. And then after they got their power, they stopped saying it directly. They still operate the exact same thing. They used to have laws. But now they don't have to have the laws because they just happen to accidentally, every time they say this, oh, that person was just him. But how come there's so many thousands of you that keep doing it? That's just him, and then that's just him. This mass shooter here, this person here in Britain is beating down this person here. This person in Sweden is doing that. The Ukrainians was like, there's no black people in Ukraine, basically. Almost none. And yet they found it upon themselves. They say, yeah, y'all can't get on this train. Y'all not even citizens here. So I understand. Y'all not getting on the train. Now, they included other people too, but none of the rage is ever as bad as on black people. So your code is to be hardcore, uncompromising that you are black first. Anybody that has any edge of that that's different, you can't be too lenient on them. Not at all. Because as soon as you're lenient on them, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if that person is super weak, and it's not just like a slight difference of opinion, it's like somebody saying, hey, we got a slight difference of opinion. This guy wears a thong and he lets somebody stick something up his ass, and then I don't. That's not a slight difference of opinion. Those are two different lifestyles. A slight difference of opinion is saying, hey, I think wearing a suit is decent for a guy. And then the other guy was like, nah, I need a button up and some and a tie. See, that's a slight difference of opinion. And we might argue on that, but then you say, hey, I can still work with this guy. I still got him around me. But the other thing is way different. Somebody say, hey, I noticed that on my WhatsApp. I talk about black people or something, not a word. I say something, one small criticism to just expose white supremacists, and they're all in my DM. Now, they don't do it as much now because I just told them, okay, cool. And guess what? You're broke. So what does that mean? So every time they say that, I just be like, okay, if they were so good, how come your country is messed up now? How come you're so broke and your country's messed up now and they got the money and they don't make anything? They don't produce no food like that. They don't produce, their soil is bad, actually. Their soil is bad. They don't got any of the raw minerals or any of this stuff. Yet you're over there sitting and you struggling. They always have a defense for them. So those people, and I even told them, I said, I can't be around. I can't trust you. And they always come up when you talk to them long enough, they can't even trust themselves. So I found that 100% of the time. That's not a slight difference of opinion. Those are two different mindsets. And finally, here's how you put all of this together. When you had a black first, when you're in business competing against the world. You are not a black business. You're not an African business. You're not whatever business. You are a business. See, everybody else thinks internationally. And I'm glad that I worked under Joe Newton. Now, if you look him up out of Elmhurst, Illinois, York High School, this guy was the first and probably only, but I might not be right about that, the first high school coach to coach at the Olympics. So secondary school, I think, what you guys would say, but first high school coach to coach at the Olympics. Now, I say that this is important. This guy basically was working at York High School. By the time I got there, he's already in his 80s. He died at like 87 or 89. And I remember competing against his athletes. And I had the mindset, look, I'm not about to bow down to these York guys just because they had 40 years of championships and he worked there for 50 years. So that basically meant he only didn't win a few. And he got second place a couple of times and third place. So almost all the years he was there, he won first, second, or third. And most of them was first. National champ 22 times, so on and so forth. Right? Okay. When I was under this guy, and this is what I noticed in the U.S. This is why when Nigerians get out of Nigeria, because their school system is actually very good. The school system in Nigeria is good. Problem is that there are too many bad actors over there that purposely hold the people back. But the school system itself is good. Because when Nigerians go other places, they typically perform toward the top. So I'll say that when I'm about to say this. When you are in the United States or in other places that have a significant white population, what they'll do is, and they don't do this in Nigeria. This is what I noticed. This isn't, I wasn't told. Now, Johnson, you can correct me on this. And anybody else that listens to me later, from my experience and what I've talked to other people, when you are around in the white schools, predominantly white, like literally the school I had been at, if you look it up, they got 1.5% other, and most of those were black, but you got a couple of non-black people there. So that means it's 98% white. Yes, I got called the N-word a couple of times by some of those athletes when they were driving by in their freaking Mercedes because they had some money. And obviously parents' cars. And I'm like, I don't know who it was, but they thought it was funny. Or the little sly things that they tried to say as I was a high school coach, being basically 21 or 22 years old. Over there, they talked about championships. Now he actually had it to back him up. He had literal Olympic champions. He had high school champions. He had collegiate champions, people, coaches, and everything. And every once in a while, he'll bring one of them in. And I'm like, dang, this is such a different mindset than when I was in high school running track and field and cross country. This is way different mindset. Like my mindset was after being a coach there, I noticed because it's in the same general conference as my high school. They kept telling me, oh, you think you're better because you work with white people. I'm like, no, I'm just think I'm better because I'm working with somebody that has a working system. It has nothing to do with that. You're in business to do the work. You're competing against everybody. It's not a black or white or whatever. Okay, I want you guys to know that. If you're in a farm, you are competing as a farmer. It sounds good as a slogan to say, this is African, this, we need to empower this. And that's good. But when you talk to other people, sure, that's fine. But when you are operating yourself, you are not competing as an African. You are competing as an international person. I want you guys to remember that. That's how you get success. Because on the first day, this man is talking about, hey, you guys don't have that much talent. But and I love taking people with no talent because we're going to make you champions. And even for the ones that can't be champions, you can still do so much better with yourself that you're going to do great things because you're going to learn things here that when you go out and you're going to be that firefighter, you're going to go out and you're going to be that banker. You're going to go out and do this, that, and the other. And this is what the coach is telling them. And from day one, they're talking about, all right, we got to get this state meet. Hey, here's nationals. If we do well here, they're already talking about that in the beginning. I didn't experience that where I was. Matter of fact, this is my experience when I talk to many people in Africa. I can't do it. This sucks. And this is the same thing. There was a teacher that was a volleyball coach. I'm not going to mention her name at the high school I was at. And I remember, and she was one of my favorite teachers when I was younger. I just maybe thought she looked good as we would say now white Hispanic. But she had a little color to it, but technically white, should be white passing. So I'm like, okay, I like the voice or something like that. But when I got older, because it was her story is always a sob story. I can't do this, Nick, this thing. And then when I became an adult and I'm speaking to her now, and she looks roughly the same with a couple extra wrinkles, whatever. But I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Guess what? She was talking about from day one of volleyball. Well, you know how it is over here. We can't win. Wait a minute. You the freaking coach? Kick her ass out. You're the coach talking on day one about how we can't win. I didn't notice that because my mindset is to fight against all of that stuff. But this is the system we got. This is what they tell you. Every time they show some criminal, it's got to be an African person. When it's one of them, they brush it under the thing. It's barely anything. But if it's one of somebody that's black, they're going to run it to the ground. It's going to be weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. They're going to run everything out of him, keep putting his face up there. The corruption. They said the murder capital of the planet of the world is in Jackson, Mississippi, predominantly black area. They said, oh, all this corruption. They said they're using, hey, all the United States is putting money to Ukraine and that. So I want you guys to know you are operating as an international entity and you are coming there to compete. And the reason why I just brought up what I brought up, it may not sound like it makes sense, but the whole thing is about this is that if you operate only from your mindset of the people around you, how do you know they're not with this failure mindset? You see? But if you are already from day one operating like, hey, this international business over here, they're one of my competitors. Now, you may not have the ability to compete with them. Don't be delusional now. You're not going to be world record holder just because you like, okay, that's still part of my competition. But you got your sights set realistically. You're not only competing against your family members. You're not only competing against your neighborhood. You're not only competing against your community. unless it's something very local, literally like a massage person or something like that. You're competing internationally. You know why? Because if you're a farmer and somebody has potatoes and you got potatoes, they are going to import potatoes, right? And we already experience that now in different places in Africa. You have a lot of people around you that have a failure mindset. They do not want you to succeed. So the solution is, if you have your core inside already set, you got yourself all the way lined up. Everything I said before was to line you up to this point. Then what you're going to do next is to then say, hey, oh, excuse me, just sneezed. I don't know if they got caught on the recording, but what you're going to do is line up to that line and say, every single one of these people, including the people way better than me, I am competing against them. Because if you remember that you're competing against them, even if you're doing cosmetics, no matter what you're doing, that then pushes you to say, I got to do better. I can't just do mediocre. I can't just look at the people next to me and say, well, I'm better than them. I have to do above and beyond. So if you want to start doing that, you got to compete. The Chinese have some of the highest savings rate on the planet. How do you get to the point where it's like that? I remember being younger saying, hey, I want to be able to live on just 10% of what I make, and I can save the other 90%, save and invest the other 90%. And then somebody said, oh, that reminds me of another person, Danny Johnson or something like that, I think was the lady's name. But yeah, that was something that I had in my head. But if you don't know who you're competing against, how do you know what you're doing is good enough? And not just good enough, but excellent. You don't. So that's what we're talking about today. Excellence. Hopefully you guys got it in between what I was going back and forth on there. But we got to be able to do this. And you can do this. So on some videos that we have moving forward, we're going to have very specific things. The last few videos, I didn't speak on anything as far as specific because we got to get the mindset right. And then we can start moving forward. So I think on the next few videos that we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about like the restaurant industry. It's not really a very highly profitable one, but McDonald's will argue otherwise, So I looked up some information within Kenya, and then I noticed there's a lot of money there because the people are getting less healthy. So think about it like this. People are getting less healthy. They're getting less healthy for a reason. As Africa starts to develop more, it's going to get many of the same issues that are plaguing other nations. Japan has gotten on top of it by forcing their people to exercise an outrageous amount, and they measure their waist and everything. They said, we're not going to allow our people to get fat. All right. That's one method of doing it. Okay. That's one method. But you guys have now a dairy industry, and it's just going to make everybody fat. That's where a lot of the fatness is coming from, that cheese, that dairy. Africans are actually, 80% plus? Almost all of the people are allergic to dairy. Like, Africans did not drink dairy. Just letting y'all know that. You don't have to believe me. Look up. Huge. That means the headaches, the constipation, getting sick, all of those things, that comes from the dairy increase that people are having in their lives. The eggs increase that people are having in their lives that they did not eat like that 20 and 30 years ago. But today they are. So with that being said, if you're in business, you see this and you say, I can go into health related things or go in a restaurant. Hey, people are not going to be eating. So you could probably open up a health one, or you could just say, hey, look, it don't matter which one. I'm just here to make the money. Okay, if that's how it is, then that's what we're going to talk about. Because restaurant business, if you think about it, people are when they develop more, they probably not wanting to, they get more lazy when it comes to, putting in the work and cooking their own food. They say, oh, I'm run down. Hey, it is what it is, man. Imagine if you were forced to do that. People are getting colonized or in chains or something like that. You're forced to do those things. Hey, you know what? If you were forced under pressure or something like that, I'm sure you would do it. But for yourself, you're going to look at it and say, I don't need to. So restaurant business might be something that you look into. We're going to talk about that here on the next one. And we're probably going to put that on the Make Money Online in Africa business, because I'm going to come from the slant that you can make money online from that, as well as the physical offline world. So I'll talk to you all on the next one. Thank you guys for coming out.